The Congo Free State was a large state in Central Africa from 1885 to 1908, which was in personal union with the Kingdom of Belgium under Leopold II. Leopold was able to procure the region by convincing the European community that he was involved in humanitarian and philanthropic work and would not tax trade. Via the International Association of the Congo, he was able to lay claim to most of the Congo basin. On May 29, 1885, the king named his new colony the Congo Free State. The state would eventually include an area about the size of the present Democratic Republic of the Congo. Leopold's reign in the Congo eventually earned infamy due to the increasing mistreatment of the indigenous peoples. Leopold extracted ivory, rubber, and minerals in the Upper Congo Basin for sale on the world market, even though his nominal purpose in the region was to uplift the local people and develop the area. Under Leopold II's administration, the Congo Free State became one of the greatest international scandals of the early 20th century. The report of the British consul Roger Casement led to the arrest and punishment of white officials who had been responsible for killings during a rubber collecting expedition in 1903. The loss of life and atrocities inspired literature such as Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and raised an international outcry. Debate has been ongoing about the number of excess deaths in this period. The boldest estimate has it that the forced labor system directly and indirectly led to the deaths of 20% of the population. During the Congo Free State propaganda war, European and U.S. reformers exposed the atrocities in the Congo Free State to the public through the Congo Reform Association, founded by Casement and the fervent humanitarian journalist E.D. Morel. Also active in exposing the activities of the Congo Free State was the author Arthur Conan Doyle, whose book The Crime of the Congo was widely read in the early 1900s. By 1908, public pressure and diplomatic maneuvers led to the end of Leopold II's rule and to the annexation of the Congo as a colony of Belgium, thenceforth known as the Belgian Congo. In addition, a number of major Belgian investment companies pushed the Belgian government to take over the Congo and develop the mining sector. Background: early European exploration. Diogo Cao traveled around the mouth of the Congo River in 1482, leading Portugal to claim the region as England did with River Victoria. Until the middle of the 19th century, the Congo was at the heart of independent Africa, as European colonialists seldom entered the interior. Along with fierce local resistance, the rainforest, swamps, and attendant malaria, and other diseases such as sleeping sickness made it a difficult environment for European invasion forces. Western states were at first reluctant to colonize the area in the absence of obvious economic benefits. Stanley's exploration in 1876. Leopold II, King of the Belgians, hosted a geographic conference in Brussels, inviting famous explorers, philanthropists, and members of geographic societies to stir up interest in their humanitarian endeavor for Europeans to take in Central Africa so as to improve and civilize the lives of the indigenous peoples. At the conference, Leopold organized the International African Association with the cooperation of European and American explorers and the support of several European governments, and was himself elected chairman. Leopold used the association for the promotion of plans to seize independent Central Africa under this philanthropic guise. Henry Morton Stanley, famous for making contact with British missionary David Livingstone in Africa in 1871, had later explored the region during a journey that ended in 1877, described in Stanley's novel Through the Dark Continent. Failing to enlist British interests in the development of the Congo region, Stanley took up service with Leopold II. who hired him to help the king to gain a foothold in the region and annex the region for himself. From August 1879 to June 1884, Stanley was in the Congo Basin, where he built a road from the lower Congo up to Stanley Pool and launched steamers on the upper river. While exploring the Congo for Leopold, Stanley set up treaties with the local chiefs and with native leaders. Few to none of these tribal leaders had a realistic idea of what they were signing, and, in essence, the documents gave over all rights of the respective pieces of land to King Leopold II. With Stanley's help, Leopold was able to claim a great area along the Congo, and military posts were established. Christian de Beauchamps, a French explorer who served Leopold in Katanga, expressed attitudes towards such treaties shared by many Europeans, saying, "The treaties with these little African tyrants, which generally consist of 4 long pages of which they do not understand a word, and to which they sign across in order to have peace and to receive gifts, are really only serious matters for the European powers, in the event of disputes over the territories. They do not concern the black sovereign who signs them for a moment." King Leopold's campaign. Leopold began to create a plan to convince other European powers of the legitimacy of his claim to the region, all the while maintaining the guise that his work was for the benefit of the native peoples under the name of a philanthropic association. The king launched a publicity campaign in Britain, drawing attention to Portugal's slavery record to distract critics and offering to drive slave traders from the Congo Basin. He also secretly told British merchant houses that if he was given formal control of the Congo for this and other humanitarian purposes, he would then give them the same most favored nation status Portugal offered. At the same time, Leopold promised Bismarck he would not give any one nation special status, and that German traders would be as welcome as any other. Leopold then offered France the support of the Association for French ownership of the entire northern bank, and sweetened the deal by proposing that, if his personal wealth proved insufficient to hold the entire Congo, as seemed utterly inevitable, that it should revert to France. He also enlisted the aid of the United States, sending President Chester A. Arthur carefully edited copies of the cloth and trinket treaties British explorer Henry Morton Stanley claimed to have negotiated with various local authorities, and proposing that, as an entirely disinterested humanitarian body, the association would administer the Congo for the good of all, handing over power to the locals as soon as they were ready for that responsibility. Lobbying and claiming the region, Leopold was able to attract scientific and humanitarian backing for the International African Association, which he formed during a Brussels Geographic Conference of geographic societies, explorers, and dignitaries he hosted in 1876. At the conference, Leopold proposed establishing an international benevolent committee for the propagation of civilization among the peoples of Central Africa. Originally conceived as a multinational, scientific, and humanitarian assembly, the AIA eventually became a development company controlled by Leopold. After 1879 and the crumbling of the International African Association, Leopold's work was done under the auspices of the Committee for Studies of the Upper Congo. The committee, supposedly an international commercial, scientific, and humanitarian group, was in fact made of a group of businessmen who had shares in the Congo, with Leopold holding a large block by proxy. The committee itself eventually disintegrated. Determined to look for a colony for himself and inspired by recent reports from Central Africa, Leopold began patronizing a number of leading explorers, including Henry Morton Stanley. Leopold established the International African Association, a charitable organization to oversee the exploration and surveying of a territory based around the Congo River, with the stated goal of bringing humanitarian assistance and civilization to the natives. In the Berlin Conference of 1884–85, European leaders officially recognized Leopold's control over the 1 million square miles of the notionally independent Congo Free State, to give his African operations a name that could serve for a political entity. Leopold created, between 1879 and 1882, the International Association of the Congo as a new cover organization. This organization sought to combine the numerous small territories acquired into one sovereign state and asked for recognition from the European powers. On April 22, 1884, thanks to the successful lobbying of businessman Henry Shelton Sanford at Leopold's request, President Chester A. Arthur of the United States decided that the cessions claimed by Leopold from the local leaders were lawful and recognized the International Association of the Congo's claim on the region, becoming the first country to do so. In 1884, the U.S. Secretary of State said, "The government of the United States announces its sympathy with and approval of the humane and benevolent purposes of the International Association of the Congo." Berlin Conference in November 1884. Otto von Bismarck convened a 14-nation conference to submit the Congo question to international control and to finalize the colonial partitioning of the African continent. Most major powers attended the Berlin Conference, and drafted an international code governing the way that European countries should behave as they acquired African territory. The conference officially recognized the International Congo Association, and specified that it should have no connection with Belgium or any other country, but would be under the personal control of King Leopold, i.e., personal union. It drew specific boundaries and specified that all nations should have access to do business in the Congo with no tariffs. The slave trade would be suppressed. In 1885, Leopold emerged triumphant. France was given 666,000 square kilometers on the north bank, Portugal 909,000 square kilometers to the south, and Leopold's personal organization received the balance, 2,344,000 square kilometers, with about 30 million people. However, it still remained for these territories to be occupied under the conference's principle of effective occupation. International recognition following the United States' recognition of Leopold's colony. Other European powers deliberated on the news. Portugal flirted with the French at first, but the British offered to support Portugal's claim to the entire Congo in return for a free trade agreement, and despite the French rivals, Britain was uneasy at French expansion and had a technical claim on the Congo via Lieutenant Cameron's 1873 expedition from Zanzibar to bring home Livingstone's body, but was reluctant to take on yet another expensive, unproductive colony. Bismarck of Germany had vast new holdings in southwest Africa, and had no plans for the Congo, but was happy to see rivals Britain and France excluded from the colony. In 1885, Leopold's efforts to establish Belgian influence in the Congo basin were awarded with the Etat indépendant du Congo. By a resolution passed in the Belgian parliament, Leopold became roi souverain of the newly formed CFS, over which he enjoyed nearly absolute control. The CFS, a country of over 2 million square kilometers, became Leopold's personal property, the domain private. Eventually, the Congo Free State was recognized as a neutral independent sovereignty by various European and North American states. Leopold's rule Leopold no longer needed the facade of the association, and replaced it with an appointed cabinet of Belgians who would do his bidding. To the temporary new capital of Boma, he sent a governor-general and a chief of police. The vast Congo basin was split up into 14 administrative districts, each district into zones, each zone into sectors, and each sector into posts. For the district commissioners down to post level, every appointed head was European. However, with little financial means, the Free State mainly relied on local elites to rule and tax the vast and hard-to-reach Congolese interior. Leopold pledged to suppress the East African slave trade, promote humanitarian policies, guarantee free trade within the colony, impose no import duties for 20 years, and encourage philanthropic and scientific enterprises. Beginning in the mid-1880s, however, Leopold began to issue a series of decrees that eventually violated these conditions. Leopold first decreed that the state asserted rights of proprietorship over all vacant lands throughout the Congo territory. By 3 successive decrees, Leopold reduced the rights of the Congolese in the land to native villages and farms, essentially making nearly all of the CFSD's domainales. Leopold further decreed that merchants limit their commercial operations in rubber trade with the natives. Moreover, the colonial administration liberated thousands of slaves and forced them to work for the Free State in exchange. 4 main problems presented themselves over the next few years. The Belgian king ran up huge debts to finance his colonial endeavor and risked losing his colony to Belgium. The Free State was unmapped jungle and offered little fiscal and commercial return. Cecil Rhodes, the Prime Minister of the British Cape Colony, was expanding his British South Africa Company's charter lands from the south and threatening to occupy Katanga by exploiting the principle of effectivity loophole in the Berlin Treaty. Supported by Harry Johnston, British Commissioner for Central Africa, who was London's representative in the region, the Congolese interior was ruled by powerful kings, sultans, warlords that had to be incorporated or defeated by the state. The slaving gangs of Zanzibar trader Tippu had, for example, established a strong presence in the east and had established independent slave states. Early economics and concessions. Leopold could not meet the costs of running the Congo Free State. Desperately, he set in motion a system to maximize revenue. The first change was the introduction of the concept of terres vacantes, vacant land, which was any land that did not contain a habitation or a cultivated garden plot. All of this land was therefore deemed to belong to the state. Servants of the state were encouraged to exploit it. Shortly after the anti-slavery conference he held in Brussels in 1889, Leopold issued a new decree which said that Africans could only sell the harvested products to the state in a larger part of the Free State. This law grew out of the earlier decree which had said that all unoccupied land belonged to the state. Any ivory or rubber collected from the state-owned land, the reasoning went, must belong to the state. Suddenly, the only outlet a large share of the local population had for the products was the state, which could set purchase prices and therefore could control the amount of income the Congolese could receive for the work. However, for local elites this system presented new opportunities as the Free State and concession companies paid them with guns to tax the subjects in kind. Trading companies began to lose out to the Free State government, which not only paid no taxes but also collected all the potential income. These companies were outraged by the restrictions on free trade, which the Berlin Act had so carefully protected years before. The protests against the violation of free trade prompted Leopold to take another, less obvious tack to make money. A decree in 1892 divided divided the terres vacantes into a domainal system, which privatized extraction rights over rubber for the state in certain private domains, allowing Leopold to grant vast concessions to private companies. In other areas, private companies could continue to trade but were highly restricted and taxed. The domainal system enforced an in-kind tax on the Free State's Congolese subjects. As essential intermediaries, local rulers forced the men, women and children to collect rubber, ivory and foodstuffs. Depending on the power of local rulers, the Free State paid below rising market prices. In October 1892, Leopold granted concessions to a number of companies. Each company was given a large amount of land in the Congo Free State on which to collect rubber and ivory for sale in Europe. These companies were allowed to detain Africans who did not work hard enough, to police the vast areas as they saw fit, and to take all the products of the forest for themselves. In return for the concessions, these companies paid an annual dividend to the Free State. At the height of the rubber boom, from 1901 until 1906, these dividends also filled the royal coffers. The free trade zone in the Congo was open to entrepreneurs of any European nation, who were allowed to buy 10- and 15-year monopoly leases on anything of value, ivory from a district to the rubber concession. For example, the other zone, almost two-thirds of the Congo, became the domaine privé, the exclusive private property of the state. In 1893, Leopold excised the most readily accessible 259,000 square kilometers portion of the free trade zone and declared it to be the domaine de la couronne, literally, field of the crown. Rubber revenue went directly to Leopold, who paid the Free State for the high costs of exploitation. The same rules applied as in the domaine privé. In 1896, global demand for rubber soared. For that year onwards, the Congolese rubber sector started to generate vast sums of money at an immense cost for the local population. Scramble for Katanga early in Leopold's rule. The second problem, the British South Africa Company's expansionism into the southern Congo basin, was addressed. The distant Yankee Kingdom, in Katanga on the upper Lualaba River, had signed no treaties, was known to be rich in copper, and thought to have much gold from its slave trading activities. Its powerful Mwami, MSIRI, had already rejected a treaty brought by Alfred Sharp on behalf of Rhodes. In 1891, a Free State expedition extracted a letter from MSIRI agreeing to their agents coming to Katanga, and later that year Leopold sent the well-armed Stairs expedition, led by William Grant Stairs, to take possession of Katanga one way or another. MSIRI tried to play the Free State off against Rhodes, and when negotiations bogged down, Stairs flew the Free State flag anyway and gave MSIRI an ultimatum. Instead, MSIRI decamped to another stockade. Stairs sent a force to capture him, but he stood his ground, whereupon Captain Omar Bodson shot MSIRI dead and was fatally wounded in the resulting fight. The expedition cut off Musiri's head and put it on a pole, as he had often done to his enemies. This was to impress upon the locals that his rule was really ended, after which the successor chief, recognized by Stairs, signed the treaty. War with Arab Slavs in the short term. The third problem, that of the African Slavs like Zanzibari, Swahili strongman Tip was solved. Leopold negotiated an alliance and later appointed Tip as governor of Stanley Falls district. In the longer term this was unsatisfactory. At home Leopold found it embarrassing to be allied with Tip because of anti-slavery sentiment. Even worse, Tip and Leopold were commercial rivals. Every person that Tip extracted from his realm into chattel slavery, and every pound of ivory, was a loss to Leopold. This, and Leopold's humanitarian pledges to the Berlin Conference to end slavery, meant war was inevitable. Both sides fought by proxy, arming and leading the populations of the Upper Congo forests in a conflict. By early 1894 the war was over. Economy during Leopold's rule. While the war against African powers was ending, the quest for income was increasing, fueled by the concessionaire policy. By 1890, Leopold was facing considerable financial difficulty. District officials' salaries were reduced to a bare minimum, and made up with a commission payment based on the profit that their area returned to Leopold. After widespread criticism, this prime system was substituted for the allocation to retreat, in which a large part of the payment was granted, at the end of the service, only to those territorial agents and magistrates whose conduct was judged satisfactory by the superiors. This meant in practice that nothing changed. Congolese communities in the domaine privé were not merely forbidden by law to sell items to anyone but the state. They were required to provide state officials with set quotas of rubber and ivory at a fixed, government-mandated price, and to provide food to the local post, in direct violation of his promises of free trade within the CFS under the terms of the Berlin Treaty. Not only had the state become a commercial entity directly or indirectly trading within its dominion, but also, Leopold had been slowly monopolizing a considerable amount of the ivory and rubber trade by imposing export duties on the resources traded by other merchants within the CFS. In terms of infrastructure, Leopold's regime began construction of the railway that ran from the coast to the capital of Leopoldville. This project, known today as the Matadi-Kinshasa Railway, took years to complete. By the final decade of the 19th century, John Boyd Dunlop's 1887 invention of inflatable rubber bicycle tubes and the growing popularity of the automobile dramatically increased the global demand for rubber. To monopolize the resources of the entire Congo Free State, Leopold issued 3 decrees in 1891 and 1892 that reduced the native population to serfs. Collectively, these forced the natives to deliver all ivory and rubber harvested or found to state offices, thus nearly completing Leopold's monopoly of the ivory and rubber trade. The rubber came from wild vines in the jungle, unlike the rubber from Brazil, which was tapped from trees. To extract the rubber, instead of tapping the vines, the Congolese workers would slash them and lather their bodies with the rubber latex. When the latex hardened, it would be scraped off the skin in a painful manner as it took off the workers' hair with it. The force publique, Leopold's private army, was used to enforce the rubber quotas. Early on, the was used primarily to campaign against the Arab slave trade in the Upper Congo, protect Leopold's economic interests, and suppress the frequent uprisings within the state. The force publique's officer corps included only white Europeans. On arriving in the Congo, these recruited men from Zanzibar and West Africa, and eventually from the Congo itself. In addition, Leopold had been actually encouraging the slave trade among Arabs in the Upper Congo in return for slaves to fill the ranks of the During the 1890s, the FP's primary role was to exploit the natives as corvée laborers to promote the rubber trade. Of the black soldiers, many were from far-off people of the Upper Congo, while others had been kidnapped during the raids on villages in the childhood and brought to Roman Catholic missions, where they received a military training in conditions close to slavery. Armed with modern weapons and the chicot, a bullwhip made of hippopotamus hide, the force publique routinely took and tortured hostages villages, slaughtered families of rebels, and flogged and raped Congolese people. They also burned recalcitrant villages, and above all, cut off the hands of the Congolese, including children. The human hands were collected as trophies on the orders of their officers to show that bullets hadn't been wasted. The mutilations also served to further terrorize the Congolese into submission. This was all contrary to the promises of uplift made at the Berlin Conference, which recognized the Congo Free State.